Hello, everybody. Welcome to ACT Algebra and Geometry practice. If you can hear me, or if you can't hear me, actually, please let me know in the chat so we can get that fixed before we start. I'm just going to give a minute for everybody to come in. Make sure you have your calculators with you because you will be using those during the test. So that's what we want to practice with. All right. Again, if you're coming in just now, just let me know if you can hear me. Get your calculators out, and we will get started shortly. Okay, captions should be on. Yes, all right. We give just a couple more seconds for more people to come in, and then we'll get started. All right. As always, make sure you are following us on all our social medias and make sure to join the Discord so you get updated information and you can ask for extra help if you ever need it. Okay, so I just want to start off by giving you guys a few free places to practice ACT math. I know some people were looking for practice tests during the overview stream. So if you have the slides pulled up, or even if you have the PDF, you can click on all of these links. And so the first one will be the practice test that's available through your ACT account. The second one is Crack ACT, which I was mentioning earlier as well. It's just a database of practice questions. And then these three links here are the most recent official practice tests that are made available through Prep Scholar and ACT itself. And so if you click on all those links, they will be full-length practice tests with the essay. And so you can kind of get your timing done, get a few practice, and then once you know what you have to work on, you can go back to Crack ACT and just kind of target your practice there. Okay, so the way this is going to work is we're going to do a few questions, I think 2 or 3 questions for each category of content that is on ACT Math. The entire thing is calculator active, so please use your calculator whenever you can. And remember that this is not an AP test, so you're not necessarily graded on showing your work. So although some of the work might be helpful so that you don't make silly mistakes or you don't have too many things in your head, you do want to make sure you're not spending too much time writing everything down because you only have 1 minute per question. And so when we do the practice today, I'm also going to give you a minute just so that you can get the timing down and get used to it. And you'll notice that for some things like pre-algebra, where the content is just basic operations and square roots and exponents, you might not even need a minute, which will help you move on quicker and get the section done quicker, which gives you more time for review later on. So these are the algebra topics that are on the ACT. Pre-algebra is the biggest out of all of these sections, but it's also the easiest. It's, again, basic operations and stuff that might have been a while since you've done some of it, but you'll realize quickly that it's still in your head. You just need to get it out. Okay? Elementary algebra and intermediate algebra are kind of hard to distinguish, but you'll be able to figure it out once you get to stuff like matrices and complex numbers. And then geometry is where you'll probably need to review the most formulas. And I will go over some of them during the stream, but if you need more resources afterwards, of course, I would be happy to provide them for you. And so we have coordinate, plane geometry, and trigonometry, out of which coordinate geometry is the biggest one again. And so these things, you can see how many times I have the word formula in here, but distance and midpoint. Conics you'll only need to know a little bit of, but I would recommend getting familiar with the equations. And then, of course, parallel and perpendicular lines. And then plane geometry is more about shapes and volume. And then trig is just trig. The majority of it will be SOHCAHTOA and finding the relationships between certain parts of right triangles. Okay, with that being said, we are going to jump into our first practice question. Okay, make sure you have your calculator out, and I will give you a minute to do it. Don't put your answer in the chat until we are ready, okay? So 1 minute starting now. Okay, that was a minute. So go ahead and put whatever answer you've got in the chat. Don't worry about whether it's right or wrong for now. We will go over everything, and then you will have plenty of time to ask questions if you have them. Okay, so for the new school year, Marissa bought a pair of jeans, a shirt, and a raincoat, and we're given the sales tax, and we need to find her total bill. Now, the way to do this would be to add up her total before tax and then add the tax to it. So when we add all this up, like I said, it'll be the money without tax. And the one thing that you need to remember, this is a red star because this is where I see common mistakes, is remember to turn your percents into decimals before you multiply things out. If you would multiply this pre-tax total by 7.25, that would not give you the correct tax. You need to put it down to 0.0725. Remember, you got to move the decimal point 2 places to the left. Okay? So there's 2 ways to do this. Either you could add up the subtotal without tax and then find the tax and then add the 2 together, or you could do it all in one step just by adding an extra 1 to the 0.0725, because that'll give you the whole thing plus the tax. And then if you add all that up, you should get 129.23, which is D. I think a lot of people got that, which is excellent. Okay, next question. Again, you have a minute starting now. Okay, go ahead and put your answers in the chat. This one, if you see the word average, you might be tempted to immediately go to the list on your calculator and start inputting values and try to figure it out that way. But this is actually much, much simpler than that. And in order to solve it, we're going to be working backwards a little bit. So if the average, this little thing here means sum, is the sum of the individual speeds over 20, because we have 20 total laps, then our average should be 160. And so in order to get the sum of all the speeds together, we'll do 20 times 160, which will give us 3,200. And so if 19 out of those 20 laps are at 159, then the 20th will just be 3,200 minus that 159 times 19, which will leave you with the 20th lap being 179 miles per hour, which is D again. All right. Seems like a majority of you are getting it, which is good. Sometimes if you go to higher level math, it is difficult to get your brain to relax and go back into lower level math, but you guys are doing good. Okay, next question. Got a minute starting now, and I think this will take you less than that, but I'll give it anyways. Okay. All right. This one is simple probability. Again, go ahead and put your answers in the chat if you haven't already. This one is simple probability. We have a couple of marbles of different colors in a bag, and we are just picking one marble, and we want it to either be green or red. So out of all the marbles, the ones we are concerned about are the green and the red ones. Now, pay attention to the colors here, because when I was solving this for the first time, I took blue and green instead of red and green, because I didn't read it all the way. But we should have 29 total marbles, and then we'd have 8 green and 5 red will give you 13. So your probability will be 13 out of 29, which is C. Okay. Great job, guys. Let's see. I think there's a question about the last one, but the last one also worked with 150. Let me go back. 159 plus x over 20 equals 160. If that over 20 is for 159 plus x in parentheses, like if it's the whole thing over 20, then yes. If it's just x over 20, then no. It's hard to type things, so I'm not sure which one you're talking about. But yes, you'll just end up solving it the same way. I just did the 20 times 160 first to get it out of the way. Okay. Yep. So number 2, again, we are just finding from the average, we are just finding the sum, which happens when you multiply back the average with the total number of instances that you have, which in this case is 20. And then because 19 of our laps were the same, we just multiplied to find the sum of all those 19 laps and then subtracted to get the 20th. Okay. Back to geometry. This one should have been simple. I think mostly everyone got it. So we are going to move on to elementary algebra. Okay. A little step up, but not too big of a step up. Again, I'll give you a minute starting now. Okay, I saw a bunch of answers come in before a minute, which is good because that means on the actual test you would get to move on. But I still wanted to give the full minute just to be safe. Okay, if E is H and F is 3, this one we're just evaluating. We're just going to plug things in. Red star next to the 3 cubed. Sometimes if you are going too fast, you will forget the difference between multiplication and exponents. Do not read this as 3 times 3 instead of 3 to the third. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 to the third is 27. Okay? So then when we do 64 minus 27, we'll get 37, which is B. Yep. All right. Next question. A minute again, starting now. Okay. Yeah, getting some fast answers in the chat. Hopefully this is because you all actually got D and not because one of you is scared to put something other than D. So if you got a different answer, please let me know, because that way we can go over it and make sure that you are understanding why the answer is a certain answer. Okay, for this one, it might be easier for you to just plug in the answer choices in a way. If you look at it on first glance, we want to multiply to negative 18 and sum to negative 7. This is the trick for factoring when there's no coefficient on the x squared. And so when you look at this at first, you'll see that they all multiply to some sort of 18. Now, the way to eliminate the most answers here would be to figure out which ones sum to negative 7. So if we look at all of these, this is not negative 7. This is positive 7. This is not negative 7. This is negative 7. And this is not negative 7. So that's a faster way than to try to check for both conditions first. So your answer is D. And then just in case, if you are trying to go back and check your work, say it's the end of the section and you want to go back, I did multiply it out just to show you what that would look like. You could definitely do this by putting this in the y equals in your calculator and then finding the zeros. But because you're given the answer choices in factored form here, it might just be faster for you to just plug in the answer choices. So this would be one of the times where using your calculator might not be the best option, but generally in other times you do want to use your calculator. Okay, last one for elementary algebra. Giving you a minute, starting now. Okay, this one involves perimeter and the length and a width. So, and a rectangle. So the perimeter of a rectangle is 2 times the width plus 2 times the length. Here it'll equal 32. So all we need to do is plug in the expression for the width and the length and multiply it out. And when we solve out this equation, we will solve to x equals 4. Red star, because the question asks for the value of 3x. So I think someone put A, and that's perfectly fine. But again, you want to make sure you are reading out the entirety of the question. And when we get x equals 4 here, we'd have to multiply it by 3 to get 12 as our actual answer. So the correct answer for this would be B. Now, if you're in a rush, you might have put x equals 4 at first, but that's why it's also important to pace yourself so that you have time to review. So this could be entirely possible where you'd be like, oh, I forgot to do this, and then you'd go back and fix it. So it's all about the balance between doing it quickly and having time to review. Okay. This is something that I wanted to review before we jump into intermediate algebra, because I saw a couple people talk about it during the overview stream. Matrices and complex numbers are two things that show up occasionally on the ACT math section. They're not going to be more than maybe 2 or 3 questions total, but they do come up. And so I want to go over complex numbers first, just because it's simpler of the two. So a complex number is anything that has the form a plus bi, and I in this case is the imaginary number that is equivalent to the square root of -1. The conjugate of this complex number is a minus bi. So on the stream, on the math overview stream, we did something that kind of involved multiplying those out. And so when we do multiply those out, you want to remember that I, when it's taken to certain exponents, it forms a pattern. So for example, if I is the square root of -1, then I squared is -1. So you want to keep that pattern in mind. You want to make sure you remember that pattern, and also to use the conjugates if you need to at any point, or how to multiply them out. Generally, when you are given something that involves factors like a plus bi and a minus bi, the I will always solve out to something that is not a square root of -1. Like, it won't be that kind of a weird answer. It'll probably round up. Okay, and then matrices. So for some of you, I think this is the first time that you'll see it. So we're going to try to go over it as best as possible, but I will probably end up giving you guys more resources later. So a matrix is a series of numbers in 2-dimensional form. There's rows and columns. And the 2 important rules is that matrices can only be added or subtracted if they are the exact same size. And then matrices can only be multiplied or divided if the number of columns in one matrix equals the number of rows in the other, or vice versa, obviously. Okay, so when you're adding and subtracting matrices, let's move to this example just to show you what a matrix looks like. If we pretend that these are the same size, if you're adding or subtracting, all you do is add the first value to the first value, second value to the second, third to the third, fourth to the fourth. And the same way for subtraction, you just match the numbers together. Multiplying gets a bit more tricky. So when you are determining the size of your matrix, you want to make sure it's written out row by column. And then the trick that I like to use is that it'll just be the outer 2 numbers as the solution. So here we're multiplying a 2 by 2 by a 2 by 3, and we end up getting a 2 by 3. Okay? And so the way that multiplication and division is the same way, it's just you're dividing numbers instead of multiplying them. The first column will go with the first row, and then the second column will go with the second row. So if we use it as A, B, C, D, and A, B, C, D, E, F, instead of the numbers here, just to break it down a bit, you can see that we go A to A, and then C to B, then we go A to C, and C to D, then we go A to E, and C to F, and then kind of the same pattern. So you'll see A, C, E here, and you'll see B, D, F here. So that's generally the formula that'll come up. Multiplying matrices might not even be a question. You'll probably just get addition or subtraction. Multiplying matrices does take some time, and there is a lot of room for error in there, but the more you practice this, the better it'll be. Now, the issue with practicing it is that it doesn't come up often enough for you to get, like 20 practice questions. But hopefully that explains it a bit better. And then this is just an example of it worked out with actual numbers. And then you can see the result you'll end up getting here. There is a way to do matrices in your calculator. I actually do not have my calculator with me, so I will probably post this afterwards. But similar to the way you can do lists in your calculator, you can also edit and put in matrices in your calculator as well. And so because you have your calculator with you the entire time, you can also just multiply and add matrices within your calculator. And you don't have to do any of this handwriting work, which takes a while. Okay, so I will put that in the Discord later because it will save you so much time. But I also wanted to make sure you guys understood how the numbers are working so that you don't just get there and you're like, oh, okay, these are certain numbers. Hopefully it's the right answer. And if you're multiplying, just one thing to mention, if you're multiplying by, like it says here, a vector, which is just one or like one column or one row, then you basically just multiply that one factor by everything. Okay? So that was a little quick intro into multiplying matrices. Again, I totally wish I had my calculator with me, but I don't. So I will definitely be posting that later to give you a guide on how to do it on your calculator. Okay. The funny thing is I didn't even give you another practice question about matrices in here. So keeping that in mind, we're going to store that away for the rest of this session. And we're going to go on to more intermediate algebra practice questions. Okay? I'll give you a minute starting now. Okay, I just dropped a link in there to a PDF that will show you how to do operations with matrices on the TI 83 or 84. So hopefully that is helpful. Okay, we got a couple of conflicting answers for this one. So the slope of a line perpendicular to the line whose equation is 3x minus 2y equals 0. Now, parallel versus perpendicular lines. The easiest way to remember this is, well, I guess, parallel lines always have the same slope as the line they're parallel with. That's why they run right next to each other like this. The reason why they never intersect is because they have different y-intercepts. So one might start up here and the other one might start down here. They have the same slope, so they're going to continue at the same rate, but they'll never meet each other because they started in different places to begin with. Perpendicular lines are rotated on the axis so that they meet and they form the plus sign. So perpendicular lines, for their slope, it'll be the opposite sign and the reciprocal of the original line. So the easiest way to do this is to put this equation into your regular y equals form, where you have mx plus b, so you can easily see what the slope is. And then we'll get 3 over 2 as our slope. And so the negative and reciprocal of that would be negative 2/3. So the answer here would be B. Does that make sense? So remember, parallel is the same, perpendicular is the opposite sign, and the reciprocal. Most people say negative reciprocal, but if you start with the negative, then you get confused. But opposite sign and reciprocal. Okay. I don't see any questions or anything, so we're going to move on. I hope you guys can see this clearly. If not, I will read it when we go to solve it, okay? So I'll give you a minute for this one, starting now. Okay. Hopefully you remember what the quadratic formula is. If not, that might be something that you need to revise. So here, if you can't see it very clearly, it's x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 whole squared minus 4 times 3 times 8 all over 2 times 3. And if you remember, the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So if we're looking for the original equation, which will be in the format ax squared plus bx plus c, the fastest way to do that is to just look at the plugged-in version and separate out the variables from there. So the a is 3 because the bottom is 2 times 3. So a is 3. C is 8 for sure because it's negative 4 times 3 times 8, and it is 4ac. Now b, some people might have flipped it around a bit. You want to remember that the b in the front is the opposite sign. So b is not 3 here. B is negative 3. And if you'll see that here, because it's b whole squared. So if your b is minus 3, then your equation should be 3x squared minus 3x plus 8, which is c. Does that make sense? Okay. The number 5 really doesn't show up anywhere in the formula. So if you wanted to just look at it based on which numbers are in the formula, you actually could have eliminated most of these answer choices except for C. But a good way to make sure you're getting the right answer is to just extract all the variable letters from the formula. All right. Last one on intermediate algebra. All right, 1 minute starting now. Okay, that question seemed to have slowed some people down for a second. Good. You will notice that the ACT math section does get harder and harder as you continue. So hopefully you'll spend less time doing the questions in the beginning, so you'll have some extra bank time just in case a question happens to take you over a minute. So this is a system of equation with two equations. You could do this a multitude of ways. It just depends on which variable you solve for first. And so here I solved for x first. I did y equals 2 minus 4x, and then plugged it into the second equation. And after I simplified it all, I got x equals 2. And then you can pick any equation to plug it back into once you've figured out what your first one is. And I got -6 for y. Okay, and so the answer for that is A. Very nice. You guys are on a roll today. That is good, because the better prepared you are, the less you have to work on before that. So I would encourage you, even if you end this session and think that you might not be having much difficulty with a specific type of question or a specific content area, I would still encourage you to take a practice test or two, go over the sections, because they will show up in slightly different amounts every time, and there might be different topics. So there's only so much you can test within 60 questions. Okay. Geometry. All right. Take a breath, switch off the algebra, and turn on the geometry. Okay. You do not get any geometry formulas on the ACT. There is no formula sheet, nothing of the sorts. They only use formulas that you should know. So for some people who have taken AP Calculus, you would remember that they gave you formulas for more complex volumes or more complex areas. Here, the majority of the stuff you're going to use should be stuff that you already have memorized. Now, there was a formula sheet type of deal that was posted during the ACT Math Review, like overview section stream. I have some on the slides here, but if you want a more comprehensive list, I can try to find one, or I can try to make one. But really, the best way to do it was to get a piece of paper and just write down every geometry concept you could think of, and then start trying to fill in the formulas for it, because all of it has to be memorized. And I can't tell you which ones will show up and which ones won't. So here I have just a few. I have the midpoint formula, which is the average of the x's and the average of the y's. We have distance, which is the difference of the x's squared plus the difference of the y squared, all of that square rooted. Then this is the axis of, let me turn on the laser pointer. This is the axis of symmetry. So if you are dealing with quadratics and you need to find a minimum or a maximum, this would be one of your formulas to start with. So you'll get the axis of symmetry, which is where it'll be even on both sides. And this is the vertex formula. Now, you might be thinking, how am I going to remember minus b squared minus 4ac over 4a for the y of the vertex? You actually don't, because once you figure out negative b over 2a, you can just plug it back in to the quadratic, and then your life goes on from there. Okay? Now, I didn't include the conics, like all of them, because the one that shows up most commonly is the circle. I have seen a question about hyperbolas, so I think that is on the review sheet that was distributed earlier, but I will give that again, and then I'll also find a few others just so you have a nice overlap of all the geometry formulas that you need. But the equation for a circle is x minus h whole squared plus y minus k whole squared equals the radius squared. Okay. First geometry practice question. I'll give you a minute, starting now. Okay. So we're given a graph and we need to find the equation of the line. There's two major components that go into a linear equation. One is the slope and one is the y-intercept. Now, you may be thinking, y-intercept is much easier to find from a graph than slope. Okay? So here on this graph, we can tell that the intercept is here at -1. If we look at all the answer choices, the only one with that is D. If you want to confirm it, you can tell that the line going this way means that the slope has to be negative. So that further confirms it. Now, if there were multiple options that had -1 as the y-intercept, then you would need to go into finding the slope, which is fine. It just takes a bit longer than just finding the y-intercept. So here we can see up here is at 2, -2, 0, and here we're at 0, -1. Or if you just look at the pictures without having to figure out the points themselves, you can kind of tell that it is going at about half per x, -1/2 to be exact. Now, I say that, take that with a grain of salt. Pictures and graphs are not drawn to scale, so sometimes this may be a bad idea, but we had multiple ways to back it up here. So I'll give you a pass on attempting to estimate the slope from the shape of the graph here. Generally, on the ACT, you will not need to look for the exact slope. You will just need to look for the sign and the y-intercept, because most of the choices should be eliminated by then. Okay. Next question, we have a circle. I'll give you a minute, starting now. I think just about everyone got that under a minute, which is great. Okay. Obviously, some questions regarding circles will be more difficult than this, but you might also get this. So, the radius of a circle whose equation is x² plus y² equals 100. Now, this will come easy for you guys because I just told you what the formula for the circle is. But maybe you want to do a quick refresher before you go into the exam room. All right, just keep those in your head. For some people, it works if you just brain dump all the formulas on the page. Could work for you, could be wasting extra time. You'll know it when you get to it. Depends from person to person. But here, the answer is 10. R² is 100. Square root of 100 is 10. There's no such thing as a negative radius here. Okay, so we do not need to worry about plus minuses. Awesome. Last coordinate geometry question that doesn't even involve a shape or a graph. Give you a minute starting now. All right. Make sure that when you see an f of x and a g of x, or even just an f of x, you don't default to trying to put it in your calculator. Read the entire question first, because this one does not involve plugging the equation into your y equals on the calculator. Okay, so we are finding f of g of -2. So we're going to find g of -2 first, which we just plug in. We get -1. And then we're finding f of -1. And so when we plug that in, we'll get -4, which is a. You guys are doing really good. Okay? Plane geometry. Give you a minute, starting now. Okay. Okay, we're gonna go over this. So we have parallel lines cut by a transversal. All right, now for this specifically, we have the angle x here, which is on the inside of A and C on the side of C. And we have angle y, which is on the inside of B and D on the side of B. So both of these are interior angles, and they're on opposite sides of the transversal, which makes the answer to this B. They are alternate interior angles. A lot of you put E for corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are a bit different. Corresponding angles are on the same side, but they are, one is on the exterior and one is on the interior. So if we had an angle up here, and if we had an angle down here, then those would be corresponding angles. But because they're on opposite sides, they automatically become alternate, and we can't know for sure if they are complementary or supplementary because we're not given any information, so we're just going on the location. Do you think it's worth it to read the description or just look at the picture? It definitely depends on what type of question you're on, what kind of question you're on. In this case, you don't really need to read this here because you can clearly see that it's parallel lines cut by a transversal, and both the angles are labeled for you. But sometimes they won't be labeled. Sometimes it'll ask you for the sum, but then you can tell that because the answer choices would be numeric and not asking about the relationships between the angle pairs. So for this one specifically, you don't really have to read this, but there might be some times where you do need to get extra context or extra information for the question. Hope that answers that. So are we good on the difference between alternate interior and corresponding angles? Isn't MXA the other side? So the name of the angle, yeah, okay. This might be one thing that I need to know. So the name of the angle and the middle letter is the same thing, basically. So angle MXA is the same as angle X, and angle MYB is the same as angle Y. So even though it says MXA, X isn't any of these 3 points. X is actually this angle, and Y isn't any of these 3 points. Y is just this angle. So yeah, that might have been confusing, but just remember that they are labeled on the picture. If you're having trouble distinguishing, just remember that they've identified the lines, all of the lines, with letters. And so each of this is A, M, and C. This is B, N, and D. So all of the points are labeled for the actual lines. And then the middle letter here will really be the biggest indicator of which angle we're talking about. Now, if X and Y weren't labeled here, then these would probably either be named differently or you'd have to kind of draw it out and figure it out. So if they just said angle MA, then you might be looking at this. But if they're giving you 3 letters, generally the middle letter will be the one that you are looking for. And if you're still confused, just see what's labeled as points and what isn't labeled as points. Hopefully that clears things up. Okay. Next question, more angles. I'll give you a minute starting now. Okay, so here we do not have enough information to determine supplementary or 90 degrees. So we'll have to default to 180. Now, the one thing you need to remember is that angles that are directly opposite each other when they're formed from the same line and point here will be the same. So these two are both 2x, these are both 3x, and these are both 80 degrees. So when we figure this out, we can just sum all of these up and have them equal 180. And then we'll solve for x, and you'll get 20, which is C. Okay. The only time you can assume that something is 90 degrees is if it tells you, or there is very clearly the right angle box. Oops. That is the only indicator if something is for sure 90 degrees. In any other case, you probably need to default to finding the 180 and then finding the chunk out of it. Okay. Last plane geometry question. I'll give you a minute starting now. Okay. As I was reading the question, I am debating the fact that I may have written the word wrong. So I'm going to talk through it, and then we're going to double check and see if I was right or wrong, because I don't think I was. So we have the circumference of a circle increasing from 10 pi to 15 pi. Now remember that circumference is pi times diameter. Okay? So our diameter is changing from 10 inches to 15 inches. Now our diameter is 2 times the radius. So if the diameter here is changing from 10 to 15 inches, which is by 5 inches, then our radius should change by 2.5. I did it wrong. This is not 20 to 30. This is an example of what you shouldn't do. Okay? You need to remember that diameter is 2 times radius. Radius is not 2 times diameter. Radius is the smaller one of the two. Diameter is the bigger one of the two. So the answer is not B. The answer is E. Okay? I should have caught myself here. And if you did it like I did, you probably should have caught yourself here as well. Your radius will always be smaller than your diameter. So the correct answer here is E. Please disregard this. Okay? If the diameter increases from 10 to 15, then your radius will increase from 5 to 7.5, which is 2.5. The answer is E. Okay? I will go back and correct this. All right. Trig. Yes, the increase is 2.5 inches. E. Okay. Trig. I didn't give you formulas for trig because there are ways to solve trig questions without having stuff. You can always solve trig questions with SOHCAHTOA. There are other things that you can use that'll help you, but there's a way to solve them with just SOHCAHTOA. So I didn't give you formulas, but they are probably on that sheet that I gave you. So question 1 out of 3. I'll give you a minute starting now. I'm actually going to give you less than a minute because we are running out of time. So I will give you 40 seconds and go over this quickly. I'm actually going to give you less than 40 seconds because we really are running out of time. So tangent function is equal to all of the following, except you're going to solve out each one of these for tangent. Sine over cosine is tangent. Secant over cosecant, eventually, secant is 1 over cosine, cosecant is 1 over sine. They are opposite to what they seem to be. This also evaluates to tangent. 1 over cotangent is obviously tangent. 1 over cosine, which is 1 over secant, is not tangent. So the correct answer is D. 1 over cosine over sine is the same thing as 1 over cotangent, which is tangent. Okay. Next question. I think we are only going to have time for this one, so I would encourage you to do the last question by yourself after the stream. So I'll give you 30 seconds to do this one. Okay, enough people have given an answer, so I'm going to go over it. Tangent, SOHCAHTOA, tangent is opposite over adjacent. All right, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So you will have to solve for your hypotenuse here. Please do this in your calculator. If I guarantee you will mess up 17 squared in your head. Just write it in your calculator. You got the square root of 370. So we'll have 17 over square root of 370. Make sure you read these answer choices. C is multiplication, not division. There is an extra division bar in here that you need to have to get your answer to be D. So make sure you are reading all of your answer choices correctly. Okay. This last question, I don't think we have time for, but I will post the solution because it's hidden under this, so you can't actually see it on the PDF. I will put the solution in the Discord so you can see it. Now, you can do this one of two ways. Depends on which formulas you remember. Both of those I will give the explanation for. We are unfortunately out of time, and I don't want to keep you too long on a Tuesday night. So hopefully this was good practice for all of you. Oops. Pat yourself on the back for getting, I think most of you got almost all of these right, which is really good. All right, so your timing is great. Your solutions were great. So use the topic list, like I said earlier, use the topic list and try to review everything that you're missing. If you need extra help, please make sure either you can contact us through the rest of our social media, or you can email us, or you can say something in the Discord. I will be in there later to post all the extra stuff that we were missing from today, but hopefully this is very helpful. I will see you guys in a few days.